Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Ron Babbage from Hard Dollar. We're going to be starting the STO workshop here in just a second. We're just waiting for a couple more people to log on. Hey, thanks for joining us for a few minutes today. What we'll do when we're done as well is we'll provide a copy of the presentation after we're all set. I think we've got a lot of kind of good data in here from some case study information as well, so we'd like to share that with you, and you could use that data for the things that you might be working on. So we'll send out after the presentation a link where you can download it and get a copy of this STO workshop. Thanks again for joining us this afternoon. We're going to get started in just a minute. Thanks again.
Plug in next to you so you can see the question.
Hi, this is Ron Babbage from Hard Dollar. If you're here for the STO workshop, you're in the right place. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's the top of the hour, and rather than keep anybody waiting, we'll go ahead and get moving. If you have any questions, throughout the process, I'd love to see those. That's terrific. Just for the purposes of like background noises and things, that most of the lines I think should be muted during the major part of the presentation. And then when we get to the end, I'll go ahead and unmute all the lines just in case there's on-hold music or anything like that. This will help kind of keep the presentation a little bit more focused that way. But I'll open up the lines at the end. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation about any of the content that you're seeing or anything, just shoot a little text message during that process, and I'll try to pick that up in the chat window and answer any of those questions. But again, thank you for spending a few minutes today. The whole idea behind these workshops is we're kind of privileged in a way to kind of be able to collect a lot of data from many different clients, and really oftentimes kind of have a kind of a holistic vision sometimes of how things are currently in the marketplace. So we're kind of excited about these types of programs because it gives us the ability to pull all of that collective data together, share kind of peer-to-peer information in terms of some best practice things that we're seeing going on, and then share that with the community. So we really like to think of these types of workshops as more of a workshop forum, a community building group type of thing, and it gives us the ability to kind of every once in a while share this type of data, which we're going to do today. So today's focus is on shutdown turnarounds, and the theme of today is really predicting the future of STO with HD. That prediction of the future comes along with a lot of different requirements, and we're going to kind of focus on how to make shutdown turnaround projects better and more improved with the data behind it by looking at some of the challenges that we incur, looking at some of the options that we can facilitate improvements within those projects, and then really kind of building a best practice routine around that. So to kind of start out with, if you're not familiar with Hard Dollar, you probably are, unless you just accidentally found this link and signed up. But if you are, Hard Dollar, just to kind of give you a little bit of a background, is we're one of the leading project cost management solutions out there. We're very focused on customer success, and we kind of do like to think of ourselves as the Southwest Airlines of software employers, except our plane lids stay on, and nothing flies off of a roof here like the typical Southwest airline. But we do consider ourselves a home to some terrific employees and team members that have been here for over 20 years, and we have a long history here at Hard Dollar with over 22 years of project cost management in the space. Just to kind of give you a rough idea from a market perspective, we're pretty widespread. We had our roots really in the infrastructure side. You can kind of see that there's a huge percentage there. Our vast percentage originated from that. But over the last few years, 4 or 5 years, that what used to be almost holistically inside the infrastructure realm has really beat out into utilities, building, industrial, mining's been terrific over these last few years, and oil and gas. And shutdowns have been a kind of a terrific market for us for reasons we're going to get into here in just a second. So Without any further ado, we'll start with one of the problems, and we put this slide up for predicting the future of shutdown turnaround projects and how we see things being done today versus how we see large companies, large enterprises with a great vision moving to tomorrow. The ultimate vision, of course, from a systematic approach is that from a planning and design perspective, through estimating, through scheduling, contiguous through progress, and then contiguous through finance, we have this kind of holistic approach to cost and productivity within our projects. This would be the Zen universe. Everything's connected, all data is available to us, and all life is good because we have all the information that we need. However, the reality right now is we have some issues with disparity, and those issues with disparity are kind of the root cause of many problems we're going to talk about today, and then we're going to talk about how to fix those. So on direct causes of failure, errors of oversights in the planning and preparation phase, and then indirect causes of technical failure include inadequate execution of the operation and maintenance of a given project. So what we're looking for on unified visibility and control and some of the problems that kind of draw directly out of that, if we just specify planning and design right now, we wind up with too many takeoff systems or numerous takeoff systems. We have numerous spreadsheet outputs to deal with just on the planning and design side. And then we also have typically what we see is a lack of change support in real time. So there isn't really anything for us to support the fact that we have to do many changes within that design, but we don't really have systems to accommodate that on the planning and design side. And then if you go to the next bubble that we saw in the opening slide, which is the estimating bubble or the planning bubble, then we're looking at the lack of centralized history, the lack of detail behind the history to help us build a future out of and learn from history, the lack of really an integration of schedule and how important that is when it comes to us planning out resources, the lack of norms data for us to learn again from the past specifically on mechanical things that we need to learn from historically on cost and productivity, and then lastly, a great dependency on spreadsheets, leading to, again, more dependency and less historical reference that we can rely on. The next bubble, when we move to the right, is really on the schedule side. So what we see there from a challenges perspective and what goes against the grain on unified visibility is percent complete, lack of quantity information. We're taking guesses on what the percent complete is rather than be religiously true to maybe what the true quantities are. We're doing more guesswork than we'd like to do and doing more or less quantity information that we would prefer to do. Disconnected from progress and estimating tools. Once again, the schedule is on its own, or there's no connection there. And we're certainly not getting a cost performance index that we're happy with that really indicates where we truly are this week, where we truly are today at this point in time. And then lastly, the scheduled work varies from how the work was estimated. And that's an inherent, it's not even an issue, it's just life the way it is. So we have to have a way of dealing with that so that we can create some continuity between how we're scheduling the work versus how we're estimating the work from a cost perspective and bringing those things together. On the challenge on the progress side, what goes against the grain on progress for unified visibility is the disconnect from finance. What we see too often is, again, the disparate universe of we're collecting progress, but what we see on the finance side or the ERP side is a different set of numbers, a different kind of place in time than what we're seeing out in the field. The level of detail is not matched with the plan and reported in finance, which is really probably one of the biggest things that we see all the time when we're starting a new project. Is there's an enormous amount of detail on the estimate side, of course. There's an enormous amount of detail in the way that we're planning the work. But on the accounting side or the ERP side, we're seeing it at the account level, the cost code level, and not at the activity level. And there's no match that brings those two things together. Next would be the discipline of the collection, how often, where it's being put, how random it's being placed. And that has a huge effect on how we're interpreting the data, of course. And then lastly, when it comes to progress, really the percent complete guess versus actual quantities, which was kind of a reference to what I mentioned a second ago. We're more of that looks like it's 25%, so let's use that number versus, no, that's 63 bolts that we actually did on this boiler today. The last one really is on the finance bubble. So there's a lot of overlap here. We've got, again, the manual reconciliation of the estimate to what we're seeing in finance now at different levels of detail. the level of detail isn't matched up with the plan once again. We're usually at the account code or cost code level versus the activity level. Cash flow calculations are not either on time or inaccurate because the resources aren't backed up with the data that I planned it on the estimate side. We're not tying the resources to the proper cash flow elements, so we're not getting accuracy there on the finance side. And then lastly is really the accrued earned calculations. What work is actually performed may or may not come in immediately on the invoice, so if my earned work isn't being recorded right on the progress side, I certainly am not getting an accurate picture on the finance side. So problems, 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 and certainly today what we're hoping to do is from a workshop perspective, not just talk about the problems, but really talk about how we're going to answer these issues. But I think there's something in there just about for everybody. So is it possible to kind of fix a million of those items kind of that we went through? And I think, I mean, realistically, and anytime we kind of do something like this, I think if we can solve even 80% or 50% or even a large majority of these things, life would be so much better. It certainly would be great to be a perfect enterprise and a perfect organization, but we know that that's probably improbable to happen. But if we could identify just a few of these keys and fix those things, life would be a lot better. So hopefully we're going to address that stuff coming up here. So the future lies in history. So I kind of want to start from the historical basis and then work forward throughout that process and what we can learn from history from our own data on our STO projects and then build out from there. So what I've laid out here is a restatement of what we just kind of went through a second ago in really the typical phases of a shutdown. So starting with the first phase of pre-planning, through work preparation, through tendering, through execution planning, through the execution itself, and then through follow-up of the shutdown turnaround. So what I wanted to illustrate here is through these chevrons is this is the process that we're going to follow on a standard shutdown. My challenge typically as the organization is I have mega disparity. This is why I can't get to the Zen universe that we were just talking about a second ago and all those key problems that we have with measurement between different systems. Every one of these bubbles represents a potential different system, and there may be more than what we've listed here, but these would be the main systems that we typically see disparately apart from each other. A historic database that may or may not exist that actually does have information in it, which is probably contained in the spreadsheet somewhere, may or may not be, or if we're really lucky, we'll have it in an Access database somewhere. Then we have, of course, planning and estimating, some tool that's acting as the planning and estimating tool that's giving us the ability to do the work preparation, get into the tendering side, and really plan out our project. The third one is collection and controls progress. Again, typically we see an altogether separate tool for collection and controls progress or a combo tool of collection and controls progress done through the ERP tool with limited functionality that doesn't give us every speck of detail that we're looking for. And then lastly, some element of analytics, some BI that exists, or again, back to spreadsheets again, that gives us the ability to look at that project when it's all said and done with from the follow-up side, and then we start the whole kind of process all over. So disparity perspective, if we just look at this section up here, cost and productivity is broken out between multiple systems, and down here in these arenas, the ERP, scheduling, and then spreadsheets that cover the basis of kind of all this stuff, it's a mix and munge. So right there, what I like about this illustration a lot is it kind of gives the real picture of this is why it's so difficult to get to a Zen functionality fix because we've got too many disparate systems. What we want to get to, and this is more of the Zen, and maybe as close as it can be today from a perfection perspective, is centralizing cost and productivity so that the historic database, the planning and estimating, the collection and the progress, and the analytics is all mixed into one database, one solution that has connectivity to ERP, that has connectivity to scheduling, and hopefully gets rid of most of these. That's why I've got them in black here from a spreadsheet perspective. Understanding that there's many takeoffs, there's many calculations that Excel's great for, and we may never get rid of these things because they're just going to be there. So that's great. If you can't beat them, join them. But limiting the amount of need based on the spreadsheets and much more reliance on a centralized database platform to execute what we're looking at. I think this makes a lot more sense. So the idea here of where did that number come from, if we move to that journey, if we move back to that journey, comes from centralizing historic cost and database between progress, scheduling, estimating, the takeoff system, the project analytics, one central historic cost and database to start our history that allows us to drive these other elements. Common failure by stages, if I flip back to the negative again, if we get unclear descriptions of STO activity sources, having that historical aspect and having centralization for collaboration on the project is going to help us get there. Planning, execution, reporting, and data analysis and improvements. If I break it down on the planning side, if we don't, again, have centralization, we wind up with inconsistent WBS structures, norms data that's not consistent, resources that are incorrectly specified, and then improper technical skills requirements because we're driving those things by the activity. All around the planning stage, all because I didn't have collaboration, all because I had a view that we just kind of looked at with these disparate systems. On the execution side, we looked at other things like the timely diagnosis of things to prevent us from continuing to make mistakes out in the field. And granted that when we're doing our STO projects, we don't have a lot of time to make changes. We're doing 3-day reports, 4 a.m. and 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. and then in afternoon reports. So we're on things to fix things right away. We're less concerned about cost at this point, more concerned about productivity, but we still need to be able to timely diagnose what those issues are. Productivity is not detected during testing or inspection, so we're not, again, decentralized collaboration, we're not getting it. Inaccurate measurement, we're not measuring the right things, let alone getting the right things in the right buckets. And then resource balancing, putting the right resources at the right places once we finally identified what the mistakes actually are. On the reporting side, it goes back to timing again too. If we're doing 2-day, 3-day reports, we've got to get that information, we have to have it now, it's got to be centralized, and all of those systems combined is really, really difficult to do without centralizing the database and the data level. On the data analysis side, again, we have lack of historical data because we don't have a collaboration element involved from a spreadsheet perspective. Consistent descriptions. I may call something from an activity perspective. I may resource code it one way, and you may resource code it another way, and somebody else does it another way. And we've got 3 different resource codes for one single piece of equipment. Getting to a mutual place starts at centralizing that database and centralizing the data so it's all consistent. Aggregating the centralization so it's all together, and then access to it. Making great. Now we've got a centralized ability to do that. Now, where is it? You know, let everybody has access to do it across the planes. Whether I'm from a scheduling perspective, estimating perspective, project controls perspective, it's all the way across the board. And improvements. No improvements suggested at all. Insufficient quality of suggestions. So how can I make any improvements if I don't have the data to make any, and I just kind of start the whole thing all over again? And the best I do is I go, well, how did we do it the last project? Let's just base it on that. Pull out the old estimate and let's get started there. And I don't think that's the best way to do it, of course, and I'm sure we all don't either. So predicting the present. Global spending in 2011 on oil and gas shutdown turnarounds just in Excel will exceed $13.17 billion. What's at risk? Now, if we just talk about, just pull out spreadsheets, this is a really interesting conversation to have. If we just look at spreadsheets as a whole, and you look at the number of projects that are out there, just on the spreadsheet level, just in shutdown turnarounds, if you start breaking down spreadsheet errors, there's $676 million at risk just in 2011, just based on the type of spreadsheet errors, let alone collaboration that you get, or lack of collaboration on spreadsheets. To break it down, and this is super interesting, and it's one of those things you can go home and bore your friends with and things like that, because it's all numbers. But there's a really awesome study that was done, and again, I'll send you the presentation after this is all said and done with, on 312 spreadsheets, throughout those 312 spreadsheets, and where those mistakes were. Well, audits done show that nearly 90% of the spreadsheet contains serious errors. The average cell error rates, the ratio of cells with errors to all cells, is 5.2%. And then this little table that I put together on the left-hand side here kind of shows where the mistakes were. You know, out of that 5.2%, there's the 100% on the side. Hard coding was 74.8% of those errors. A reference to a bad cell was 10.9%. But just bad logic altogether was 8.4%. Incorrect copy or pasting was 1.5%. Just omitting something altogether was 3%, and data input was 1.5%. So it's not. It wasn't. What's interesting about this? It's not necessarily there's an error in the spreadsheet from the numeric perspective, or reference or logic, but it's just somebody putting the wrong information in the spreadsheet. It's wrong reference information. So you have so many people using those different spreadsheets, and how easy it is to thumb over and finger something that you shouldn't be putting a finger on. So anyways, that formula's got legs. and we're going to talk about that here. So evidence shows that most downstream and midstream operators leave 3% to 5% of potential cost reduction savings on the table because addressing them requires a change in the organizational behavior and culture. Like, yeah, this is great, and it's awesome to talk about instituting the practice of decentralization, but yeah, it's difficult. There's a human element here that it's almost harder to do it on the process side than it is on the tools. The tool part's easy. I mean, there's tons of tools that we can do that enables this whole process to be possible, but changing the organizational function of the organization becomes the challenge. So on 44 STO project, is pre-task planning a part of project planning? Does it make a difference? And yes, it does. So from a reportable error perspective, on 44 STO projects, reportable errors when pre-planning did go into place, much less you see on the graph here, less than 1 versus almost 7 there on the no pre-project planning from a collaboration perspective. Where do the coworkers come from? And this graph is really errors at a higher rate when we're unfamiliar with the plan. Again, this goes to kind of the human element of all this, right? We have this process in place. We've got reportable error rates. And this is one of those obvious studies that you kind of roll your eyes in a way and go, yeah, of course it's going to work out this way, but it does work out this way. If you came from that area and you're not familiar with the project versus you transfer from another project and are familiar with that type of work done, there's going to be less errors, meaning that the more information I have, the more collaboration that I have, the less chance of errors that I'm going to have with my project. Obvious, but a point that, again, has to be restated of how important it is that we gain the collaboration. Error rates are higher with longer projects. And the reason why I stuck this in here is because the longer projects obviously are more costly projects. More costly projects are of greater risk to the organization because they're more expense, right? So just interesting that from a perspective of if it's less than 2 weeks, the numeric rate of mistakes that I have within my projects and within the error rates that I have from a planning perspective on value become much greater the bigger the project. One of those eye-rolling kind of statistics again, but still relative to relative to the conversation. So industry experts know acceptable range of error for detailed work or scope is 10%. Yours could be far less. Yours could be right around there. But roughly what we do see on average is about 10%. When work orders are guesstimated without any detail, the degree rate is higher. Again, seems very obvious, right? The error range could span from 25%, and I hope it never winds up that way, but up to 60% or more. So how can I manufacture kind of different variables? How can I manufacture different what-ifs? How can I make these improvements and by doing what-ifs, by doing the right KPIs? So here's how we're going to get there. And I want to focus right now on really the estimate itself. So we talked about history. Now we're talking about the estimate. There's really 8 kind of factors here. Number 1 is clear identification of the task, really understanding what that work level of activity is and getting visibility to the people that are going to be performing it in the field, how the estimator estimated it, what they were thinking when they put it together, and being very clear about that. The second one is broad participation and preparation, allowing others as wide a participation as we possibly can to build the cost model out so we get as much input as possible, and we'll get much closer to the number that we're looking for. The availability of valid data, again, goes back to the centralization. If I don't have historic data, how in the world can I get accurate data when it comes to putting this process together? Fourth is standardized structure for the estimate. Why would I want to use 8 million different structures every time I do the same type of work or something similar to that? I want to have a templatized system. I want to have the ability to use the same type of work type structures that I would use every single time as I go into this process. Provision for program uncertainties. So have my risks identified, have my escalations identified, have the things that I'm unexpected, the things that I can expect to unexpect documented in the software. Recognition of inflation, which kind of goes back to the provision for program for uncertainties, but dials down a little bit deeper. Understanding that I may have inflation issues, I might have work geographic area conditions that I may have to apply to a standard template, and having those things be part of the process. Recognition of excluded costs. So there may be things like indirects and other types of costs that I may or may not remember to do, and those things are important to have in there right from the very beginning, again, from a centralization perspective and a learning perspective so that they're included in it. And then lastly, an independent review of estimates. It's amazing how oftentimes there's not a second set of eyes or a third set of eyes or completely independent from scratch look at what we planned versus what we did. It's all kind of in one company. So those are critical things for us to do. So to kind of go into positive now on the pre-planning side, Laying out project needs with the cost down breakdown structure, critical. Creating the task templates that create the norms that standardize the coding and work packages, absolutely critical. Storing rates, and I've got a few hard dollar screens that I'm just kind of giving an example so we can do some visuals here. Storing reusable updated rates within the system so that we can reuse, build from that history, and understand where that number came from each and every time. Storing assemblies, like standardizing the crew makeup, and other assembly-like resources each and every time so that I don't have to recreate and reinvent that wheel every time that we're going to bring a new crew into something. Norms database storage, building best practice history to draw durations from, to build that accuracy from projects that I've already done that I'm very happy with on the success of that project. On the planning side, really allowing for, and this kind of shows it a little bit, but showing some flexibility in the scope. You know, on the left-hand side here, I've got this WBS and a cost breakdown structure that I may change 9 million times before I'm all done with that, and because my scope changes. And I need to be able to do that in a way where it's not an encumbrance for me to achieve from where I started to where I want to end up. On the schedule and work prep side, a couple really critical things. Create the cost and resource loaded schedules. Create true dynamics to the schedule. It's possible today to do that. It doesn't have to be export-import. Primavera's got a terrific API that's open on their side. Hard Dollar, for example, is wide open on that as well. We've put a ton of development into that in the last 6 years, and we made some great jumps even last year when we added a lot of user-defined stuff and a lot of enhancements that came out in 10.3 for that. So take advantage of that. Use that dynamic schedule with the planning tool so that you can modify those resources and see what the cost consequences are on the planning side and dynamically link with either Oracle, Primavera, or Microsoft Project. Understand the resources behind activity on the estimating side each and every time. On the schedule, and this is something I just mentioned, really take advantage of the what-if scenarios, the changes, the resource productivity. There's so many doors that open up the moment that you link to the schedule and get away from export-import. Now suddenly I go, well, what if this happens? What if I cut from 3 weeks down to 2 weeks? What if I change this crew size? What if I change this equipment? What happens to that? What changes on the cost and what changes on the productivity? You can do those things and not take a week to get those questions answered when you're hooked in like that. On the execution side, track the actual data versus the projected data from a centralized perspective. Use actual performance factors to drive the forecast. Get the visibility from start to finish centralized. Automate change tracking along the way on the execution side, and then bring true collaboration to the table. Get it so that from a SAP perspective or Oracle Financials or JD Edwards perspective, there's totally a unified front between what we're doing out in the field to what we're talking to accounting about. Number 4, great. Now I've done all this stuff, I finally have the ability to analyze because I've got the centralized data. Now I can finally, instead of weighing data and doing all the heavy lifting, now I can actually have time to analyze trends, get alerts to be successfully delivered to the right people, get to it from anywhere, setting it up so it's a web-based type of view so we don't have the issues of if I'm stuck in the middle of Chile and I don't have the ability to have connection to the mothership, I can view it on the web, and then save full historical data for future use. Again, recycling so I can learn from the history. And then a formula for bad. So audits on spreadsheets. If I go back to just the spreadsheet alone, error rate at this 5.2% error rate. I'll show that nearly 90% of the spreadsheet contains serious errors. There's a great study on this too, by the way. If you're interested, I know you'll be amused. If you're not amused by this study, I'll get you a copy anyways, but I'll send you a copy and then a donut or something. But you'll be really amused by this study. It's got some great information as to just how much is at risk when we're using spreadsheets from an error perspective, when we depend on them for everything. Results showed 94% have errors, and that the average sell rates have a 5.2% error. Now I threw this up there for posterity's sake, but I wanted to know while we're on the line if anyone can identify the mistake that's on the spreadsheet. And this is just a few numbers, so I opened up the lines and I just unmuted them. Does anybody see? And I will get you a copy. Whoever answers this first, it will get the Starbucks copy, except if you're in this room, because then you'd be disqualified. Anybody see a mistake on here? That's good. That would prove my point then. That would be good. But if you think about it, the mass numeric of numbers that you're dealing with on a regular project, this is only like 20 to 30 lines. You think about hundreds of lines, thousands of lines, hundreds of columns. and I've got one error here amongst all, unless you're a computer rocket surgeon, if you will, you'll never find it. So, but anyways, I did a session a couple weeks ago. We were in New Orleans, and there was a guy in the front row. I swear to you, in about 15 seconds, he screamed out where the number was off. Extremely impressive. He won an iPad actually in that set. We don't have an iPad today, but just look. But anyways, just to kind of drive it on home, how hard that is to identify. It's actually in the second column. The second column rate is at 7850. It says 9004 there, but we actually carried the number incorrectly down there. So it should be 7850, which is a 13% difference from what it should be, right? It says 9004 planned man hours a day. Actual man hours a day. If you really added these columns down, it would be 7,850. It's a kindergarten type of thing, but just to prove the point. So anyways, to kind of bring it home and avoiding mistakes, if we can connect, which we can today, take scope history, combine with scheduled resources, combine with cost and productivity current data, unify all that stuff together, we certainly can avoid mistakes. And I have to say that the larger companies, the companies that really have vision, the leaders, if you will, in the space, are really kind of taking that stance. And those behind, there's visions to get there, and I know we're going to get there eventually, but the leaders are doing that right now. Any questions about any of the data or any information in the presentation that anybody has online? Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Do me a favor. I think my email address is at the end. Yep, it is at the presentation. So, except that's wrong. It should say ron.babbage@harddollar.com. I tried to misdirect you there probably intentionally, so you wouldn't email. But if you email ron.babbage@harddollar.com, I'll send you a copy of the presentation. Along with, there's a couple really cool links on the Excel study that I was talking about, as well as another study that's pretty cool that revolves around the accuracy of project data that I think you'd really enjoy, the bias and means report on inaccuracy in projects by 15%. And by the way, that's how we come up. One of the numbers that we use oftentimes in our marketing is the 15% number. You see that number plus with many of our customers. The bias and means report that's a terrific report that's available online. Also shows a breakdown of the 65 different projects and how that inaccuracy stuff comes into play. So if you're interested in that, shoot me an email. I'd love to send that off to you, and I think you'd find it really interesting. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you showing up today and spending some time with us. Well, I hope to do this every month, and we'll have a new topic, go over some new figures, and build a community together. I'm assuming because we didn't have any questions today that we're all floored by the data that we've seen, and we're speechless. So hopefully that's an okay thing. But anyways, thanks again for attending, and we'll see you next time. Appreciate your attendance today. And again, shoot me an email if you'd like a copy of the presentation. Have a great day. Take care.